Hey, welcome to this week's discussion of Introduction to Game Development. I'm Dr. Phelan, and this week we're going to be talking about two things, paper prototyping and game testing. So paper prototyping is the process of thinking about the core concepts of your game and playtesting those using a paper-based prototype. It doesn't matter if you're creating a board game, a video game, a card game, whatever kind of game you're creating, you can playtest it using paper-based prototypes. So here's an example from the book of the Legend of Zelda dungeon, laying out the dungeon mechanics and the map using little cards. And here you can kind of see a paper prototype of a new dungeon and kind of working through that. The benefit of paper prototyping is it is extremely cheap to change, and it is extremely easy to see problems early on without investing a bunch of time. So if you think about implementing a dungeon crawler game as a video game in Unity, for example, it would take hundreds of hours just to get to the point where you would have a playtestable game. Whereas with a paper prototype, you can throw something together in an afternoon and be playing through it and seeing if there are major problems with mechanics or logistics or game balance. So this is a really powerful concept because it allows you to do all of the planning and testing offline before you even write any code or sit down and do major concept art investments and things like that. So the book goes through a bunch of different things about this, but one of the really valuable things that it talks about is where to get materials for paper prototyping, or rather what types of materials to use. And it talks about how you can get 3x5 cards, post-it notes, whiteboard. You can use Legos, card sleeves. Card sleeves are really cheap to buy. They're just little plastic sleeves, and you can slip paper cards in there, little index cards that you've cut out to protect those and make them feel more durable. You can also find often at office supply stores, you can get blank business cards, which are really great for paper prototyping. You can get a huge box of those, usually pretty cheap. However, another really great resource for paper prototyping is the thrift store. So if you go to the thrift store and you go to the game aisle, usually there are a ton of board games being sold super cheap. Some of them are missing pieces, but often my sons, both of them do game design, will go through and just pick up an old Monopoly game or an old Risk game just to get the pieces, to get the boards, and then they'll just cover those with the boards of paper and then do prototyping over top of those. You can get really great meeple characters, things like that, just timers, dice, etc. Just all kinds of stuff you can harvest from thrift store board games. So highly recommend you do that. In the playtesting thing, we talked a bunch about playtesting last week. So if you haven't watched that video from last week where we talk about the Plants vs. Zombies creation process and the presentation they did on that at the GDC in China, highly recommend you go back and watch that. The playtesting section starts about 4.5 minutes in, I think. So one of the things the book talks about is the difference between informal and formal testing, and so it's important to pay attention to that. But one thing I want to point out here is this part. So often when we're doing playtesting, we're kind of emotionally invested in this product, this game that we've created. And so it's important as people are playtesting that we don't argue with them about how they feel about the game. Their feelings are their feelings. They are their true feelings. They are confused. They don't understand. They don't like it. They do like it. Whatever their feelings are, you as the game designer need to take that and record it and decide if it matters. So if a player is like, this is boring, I don't like it, then maybe they're just not in the target audience for the game. But if you test it with a dozen players and they're all like, hey, this part is really hard, or I didn't enjoy this thing, or I was confused here, and you start to see patterns in how lots of people are experiencing something, then you need to go back and refine that, because that's a sign that there's a problem. What you don't want to do is sit down and explain to the person why they shouldn't be confused or how it is supposed to work. If you have to do that, then there is a problem with either your instruction manual or the onboarding process of the game. So just make a note of that. The other thing it talks about is the difference between playtesting in real time and play testing kind of how to record that data. And there's a really great story here that the author talks about doing screen capture and recording button presses. It's really interesting. And then the other thing I want to talk about is what we call the different stages of testing. So you've got not just usability testing where the player is testing the game to see how they like it, but also Q&A testing where we need to thoroughly test the game, make sure there are no glitches, make sure there's no problems with unexpected things. Often when we're testing a game, especially a video game, we know exactly what is supposed to happen. And so we'll play through the game doing it the way it's supposed to be done because we're the game designers and we know how it's supposed to go. And so we go through the normal route. But often players will play a game and they won't do that. They will go through kind of an unintended route or do things that maybe you don't expect. And so really thorough Q&A testing where people go through and essentially try to break the game is really powerful to be able to find bugs and unexpected problems that you're not going to notice as a designer. Okay. So read through both of those, but really think about paper prototyping because we're going to be doing that in the course. So pay close attention to this. And if you haven't already, if you don't have a collection of paper prototyping things, start looking around as you go to thrift stores or yard sales or whatever, and you just see old board games sitting around. Look at them and think, could I use this to prototype something? And if so, just buy those things just to harvest those parts. Okay. If you have any questions, reach out on Slack or email.